Great, thank you so much. Well, then it's my pleasure to say hello and welcome to everyone joining us today for our webinar. Before we start, first of all, I would like to let you know that we have simultaneous interpretation today between Spanish and English. Rosie is our interpreter today for Spanish and English, and for simultaneous interpretation, please click on the globe icon in the lower screen section menu and choose either English or Spanish. There's also a third channel, which is the original. So if you're able to speak Spanish and English, you can stick with the original sound. Otherwise, either choose English or Spanish for translation. I guess we will come back to that in a few seconds again for those who are joining us over the next few minutes. Now that we have made sure that everybody is following, let me quickly also introduce myself. My name is Benjamin Hudig, and I'm head of the project Enhancing Climate Services for Infrastructure Investments, CSI, with GIZ, the German International Corporation. I'm here hosting today with my colleagues Eric Sparling from the Climate Risk Institute, CRI, and of course Dan Sanding from the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, ICLR. And together with the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Cooperation, our organizations make up the PIEVC Alliance. Also with us here today is Claire Sanders from the Climate Risk Institute, and she's hosting the Zoom meeting and is also available for you if you run into any difficulties, audio or technical ones. You can find her either in the chat or send a message if you have any questions about the webinar or the series itself, or just send a message to host and panelists in the chat. For Spanish speakers, we also have Yasmin Vargas with us from CRI, and Yasmin will also support us with any further questions if you prefer to have questions also later on in the Q&A session in Spanish. Now, it's a little tradition also for our webinars that we are having some interactive polls to check out where you are from and to get to know your backgrounds a little bit. And so we are using Zoom polls throughout the session today. These polls will appear on your screen as we go. Please note also that we are recording this webinar session today, as we did also with the previous ones. And after the session, we will also send out a link to everyone who has registered for this session. The recording will also be posted later on our PIEVC webpage. Yes, okay. A special welcome also, of course, now to all our colleagues joining us from Canada, all across Canada, through all time zones from east to west. But also, I'm very happy to see participants from outside of Canada. Myself today, I'm also joining you from Germany, from Bonn, Germany. And I would also like to welcome everyone now in the chat function. So if you would like to, please introduce yourself in the chat. Please tell us your name, also where you're from. And if you're from Canada, also feel free to add your own land acknowledgement. Generally, we also encourage you to use the chat for exchange throughout this whole session. Now, let's get started with some polls. Claire, can you, you get started with the polls. I can't see that, I assume. Now there's the questions from the poll. So the first question is, where are you joining us from? Canada, Northern America, Central America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, anywhere else in the world? I don't know how much time we have for that first poll, but
I think we're pretty good. We've 60 of 81. All right, I'm going to end that poll.
Okay.
And share the results.
90% from Canada, 2 from the United States, 2 from Europe, 2% from Central America, 5% from South America, which is probably Brazil. And today we have no participants from Asia and Africa.
Pretty sure
Okay.
it's the middle of the night there, though, so I think they get pass on that.
All right, thank you so much. The second one, have you joined the previous webinars is one question. And as Claire just pointed out, last time we had some good participation and presentation from colleagues from Vietnam, but it's true, Vietnam is, as far as I can see, 11 p.m. right now, so it's a bit late for our colleagues from Vietnam to join. Yeah, have you attended the previous webinars?
Still ticking up a bit. I'll just give it another minute. Okay.
All right, so we have some colleagues who already know the procedures very well. And the third question, which sector best represents your organization? A few more seconds.
Okay. Still ticking up a bit. Okay, I'm going to end this one.
All right. A great deal of consultants, but also government of all different tiers around the world. Great. And the fourth question would be, what is your sector of focus? What are you mostly interested in?
Just about there. Oh, each time we keep getting a few more people. It's still ticking up a little bit. Hang on. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Share the results.
All right, more than a third in general climate change adaptation planning, we'll see. And the last question, number 5, maybe one of the most important questions. Have you used the PIEVC protocol before?
Okay. Well, nearly there. Just give it a sec. All right. And I'm going to end that poll. Last one. Here we go.
All right, also pretty mixed. I guess we've had a similar result also last time. So yeah, around a third or more have used the PIEVC before. Great. So that seems to be a nice mix of people and from different backgrounds and walks of life and experiences. So let's focus a little bit more on today's webinar. There's a few things I would like to mention and also hand over to Claire in a second. But let me say a few words about the webinar series again. So this is now today the third of 8 webinars leading up to an in-person global forum in April in Vancouver, BC in Canada. The community of PIEVC practitioners is now rapidly growing across Canada, but also around the world, and practices are evolving. We hope that these webinars and the practitioners network that we are developing will create new connections among individuals and organizations, and of course also improve the practices through sharing experiences with the protocol, and also of course connecting with other experts from all backgrounds, of course. We have a general schedule of webinar topics for these 8 webinars, but also since there are newcomers to our webinar series all the time, we would also welcome new and fresh ideas, of course, for topics or future presentations and presenters. You all are dealing with various issues concerning PIEVC application and implementation. So any issues that might be of common interest, any best practices and benchmarks, let us know. And if you have a project that you would like to give a presentation about, please feel free to send us an email either to pievc@iclr.ca or directly to claire.sanders@climateriskinstitute.ca. Here you can also see the overview of all our 8 webinar series sessions. Today, we are talking about institutionalizing climate change and infrastructure vulnerability and risk assessments, PIEVC in adaptation plans, professional practice, and other mechanisms. You can see also where we go from here until April next year. Also, in our last webinars in September, we took a look at how PIEVC recommendations are related to adaptation options. And in August, we provided a background on development of protocol backgrounds and on the program partnership, which is constituted by CRI, GIZ, ICLR, and the Ontario First Nations Technical Committee. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar is recorded, and I guess Claire is also showing here the web page and web address into the chat, so where you can also find the webinar recording afterwards. Now, again, coming back to today's webinar, I mentioned the title already, Institutionalizing Climate Change and Infrastructure Vulnerability and Risk Assessments. For this, we will be hearing from 3 panelists, and it's my great pleasure to now introduce these 3 panelists from Canada and also Costa Rica. But as I mentioned earlier, I would like to hand over to Claire for one slide talking about our new web space that was created for our Forum for Infrastructure and Climate Risk Assessments and the practitioners to exchange. Claire, would you like to briefly show the new web page and web space where we can exchange, and afterwards I'm going to introduce our panelists for today.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. Can you see my screen now, Ben?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And we're really excited today to be able to launch this new space. I'm putting the invitation right now into the chat, but there's some signing up work that you need to do. So I do hope that everybody here today will get in here with me.
Yeah, sorry. I think we still see Yasmin's screen right now. Sorry.
Oh, Yasmin, can you stop sharing your screen?
I'm still seeing the presentation. Sorry for interrupting.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. Jasmine, can you? Let me see if I can, oops, there we go. Perfect. All right, just let me bring mine up. Great. How about now?
Here it is.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay, so here we are. I put the link to the sign up page in the chat, but I'm just gonna give you a very, very brief walkthrough of the platform. And this is intended to be an online interactive community that's really dedicated to advancing knowledge and action in the area of climate change adaptation and vulnerability and risk assessments for infrastructure. It's gonna serve as a location where researchers, experts, policymakers, practitioners can all come together to ask questions, generate ideas, share knowledge, and communicate with others working in the field. Membership to this site is free, just like these webinars are, and you can create an account through that link. And we are able to launch this network thanks to the vision and generosity of GIZ. And we do extend our thanks to GIZ, and particularly to the GIZ CSI, so the Climate Services for Infrastructure Investment Project, for the financial support that will allow us to facilitate the network over the coming year. So let me just give you a quick, very quick walkthrough. I'm just gonna log in. And when you fill in the login information and get yourself logged in, I do encourage you to fill in as much information about yourself as you can, just so other people can see what your expertise might be in and how they may be able to connect or collaborate with you. I also want to note that this is a private group, which means that without that direct link, you will need to be approved to join the site. And again, it's free, but this is not the only hub. We call this space here a hub. This is a environmental networking website that was created in Canada and launched earlier this year. And so if you want to dig further into EarthNet, you can certainly do that. Currently, there's a lot of hubs in here dedicated to solving problems collaboratively across Canada, especially on things like home energy retrofits. However, when you come to this page and you post in this page, it remains private, just to people who are on this page. So this is the main page of it. CRI and our newly formed Canadapt hosts 3 sites on here. One is the PIEVC Practitioners Network. And if you go to the related groups, you can see the other 2 as well, which you're also welcome to join. The Adaptation Practitioners Network, which shares general resources across sectors. The Forestry Adaptation Practitioners Network, which I think is self-explanatory, but we've been hosting these 2 communities of practice for quite some time now. And this is the relaunch of these communities onto this platform. So we're really excited to move forward with these 2 as well. When you first open up the page, you'll see there's a number of posts in here, all by me, but that's not the way it's intended to be. I do hope that you come in and can start populating this page with me. You'll see right at the top, I've just published this morning a practitioner spotlight on Nazareth, who we'll hear from later this morning as well. So I encourage you to look through some of the existing posts, and you'll see there's really a variety of things that you can do in here. And I encourage you to interact with the posts. You can add replies, you can favorite them so that you can come back to them. And if you want, when there's a lot of posts on the page, you can actually search for something. So if you want to know about the next upcoming PIEVC course, you can type in course and the next PIEVC course will pop up. If you're searching for something that you can't find, you've looked through all of the resources, you can't find what you need, I would encourage you to post a question or add a resource or something like that. And to do that, you just click at the little green plus sign. You pull the pull down menu, and it really gives you, if you are looking for somebody for a job, you can post a job in here who is focused on climate risk assessments. So I'm going to share an update that says, let's see. Well, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask a question and just ask, hi, where do you get your climate data for assessments? You can make this into a poll if you want, but I'm gonna keep it private so it's just visible to the people inside this hub. And I'm gonna hit post, and I hope somebody might reply to my post at some point, and then it just appears in the space. I'm just gonna go back to, it's pretty self-explanatory, so I'm actually not going to dig too much deeper into it. There is a welcome post here. There's a map that you can explore with PIEVC assessments on there. But I'm just going to show a couple of other things before I turn it over to our presenters today. You can see who else is in the space by clicking on people, and you can directly interact with others in this space. And I see this, we were at 15 this morning, and all of a sudden we're up to 42. So that's really great. People are jumping into the space right now as we speak, which is incredible. And you can, if you click on the spyglass, you can open it up and you can see where they're signing up from. So you've got 36 members, click on that, and you can see where they're all coming from and what some of their interests are as well. So again, I encourage you to fill out your profile, and people can actually send you direct messages on here that will then also come to your email address that you put in when you signed up. And just the very last point I'll make about this site before I stop sharing my screen is that you will receive an email to the email address that you signed up with about once a week or once every 2 weeks from me from this site with any new posts that were in here. So you don't have to keep coming back to the site unless you want to. And you can stay up to date on any posts that are made in here. If something piques your interest in that once a week email, click on the link. It'll bring you directly back to the site, and you can interact directly with the posts in there. So I welcome you to join again. I'll put that link in there. I've seen some messages coming in, so I'm going to check and see if anybody's having trouble getting in. But stay tuned. We've got some really interesting things coming up. We included a really great spotlight on Nazareth, and a terrific interview that Jasmine did with her in Spanish and in English as well. So stay tuned for this space, and we'll be announcing some more of our plans for the Global Forum through this space. And I'm also going to be trying to move some of the discussion questions throughout our webinar today into this space so that we don't lose them. And I think that's part of the benefit of having a space like this is as soon as the webinar is over, we don't lose that connection with all of you. So thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you in the space.
Thank you so much, Claire. Beautiful. It looks really, really nice. And I also have to say, I signed up yesterday, I guess, and there were 15 signed people. Now it's more than 40. So it's growing. Beautiful, great. And yeah, as you pointed out earlier, I think there's a great chance to continue the discussion also online, and to also, of course, have some photos and faces to our participants, and to, of course, get quick exchange possibilities across the world, from Canada to other countries and vice versa. So I think that's a great chance for better connecting with experts and practitioners. So thanks a lot for that. And then let's come to our panel session today. Let me start with Harshan Radhakrishnan. Harshan is from Vancouver, British Columbia, and he's a manager in climate change and sustainability initiatives, an engineer, and Harshan deals mainly with two bigger issues. One is the management of programs and initiatives that help to address sustainability and climate change adaptation and mitigation in the practice of these professions. And second, outreach to provincial and municipal governments, technical groups, and others in relation to climate change and sustainability strategies. Harshan is a professional engineer registered with Engineers and Geoscientists in British Columbia, with more than 10 years of experience in environmental regulation, oversight of regulatory programs, as well as in-depth understanding of municipal, provincial, and federal regulatory requirements. He provides staff support for engineers and geoscientists in BC, climate change and sustainability advisory groups, and plays a key role in supporting the implementation of engineers and geoscientists' climate change action plan in British Columbia. I think the focus today is a bit more on institutionalization and also policy-related questions. So very interesting to see that there is a focus on not only national issues, but also subnational issues and the various other tiers of government. Our second and third presenters today are Nazaret Rojas and Ivan Delgado. Nazaret Rojas Morales is an agricultural engineer with a master's degree in business administration, economics, sustainable development, and climate change. And she currently works at the National Meteorological Institute in Costa Rica, conducting research on hydrological climate change risks. She also supports partner institutions on issues relating to climate risks and climate change adaptation. And last but not least, Ivan Delgado. Ivan has a master's degree in political science and is now the director of the Directorate for Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment and Energy in Costa Rica. So it's a great pleasure to have you on board for this session today, where we focus a bit more on institutionalization, on PIEVC, but also in the case of Costa Rica, how PIEVC was translated and adapted into a very own Costa Rican methodology called MERCI. So it's a pleasure to hand over now to Harshan to give the first presentation. The floor is yours, Harshan.
Hello, everyone. Jasmine, if you would allow me to share my screen and give me a heads up when you guys are able to see it, that'd be great.
I can see it, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, delighted to be here. I'm going to be sharing with you today about the role of Engineers and Geoscientists BC as a professional regulatory body in institutionalizing climate risk assessment and management in professional practice. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and in particular, the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, on whose territories I stand. In under 20 minutes or less, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Engineers and Geoscientists BC, our role and mandate, and touch upon the implementation of our climate change action plan. I'd also like to talk to you about how addressing climate risk relates to our mandate and how we've been able to strategically leverage the use of PIEVC really as a tool in a toolbox when it comes to climate risk management in professional practice. Then I'll switch gears and talk about some of the current climate change adaptation work that's happening in BC to provide an overview of the kind of opportunities that become available to those that have training in climate risk management. Then I can finish off with some key takeaways, and I can pause for a bit for any questions that follow thereafter, but I'll be available there after all the presenters are done so that we can have a bit of Q&A. So for those that do not know, Engineers and Geoscientists BC has the established mandate to protect the public interest respecting the practice of professional engineering and professional geoscience. And we also have a responsibility to respond and adapt to changes in practice environments, advances in technology, and other emerging issues. To deliver on this mandate, we have a new strategic plan that establishes a new vision for the organization, modern regulation for a resilient world. The plan will guide our actions as an inclusive and future-focused progressive regulator. Shown on the screen is one of the strategic imperatives on social responsibility, where we've identified that promoting reconciliation, promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion, and taking action on climate change are all equally important work that we will undertake in pursuit of this vision. I'd also like to mention that Engineers and Geoscientists BC has a council-endorsed climate change action plan that has now been integrated into our strategic plan. The plan provides a proactive approach to supporting registrants with adapting to changing climate and reducing emissions. It speaks to leadership, how we can model the way and lead by example, and how we can collaborate with others to leverage resources and to maximize impact, and how we can look at the registration processes to make sure that it incorporates climate change competencies, and how we can provide ongoing opportunities for knowledge sharing through continuing education events, and finally, how we can provide registrants with practical and relevant resources to inform professional practice. Over the next few slides, I'd just like to provide an overview of how the implementation is shaping up. In terms of collaboration and partnerships, Engineers and Geoscientists BC actively seeks out opportunities and provides outreach to various stakeholders and groups, such as governments, indigenous and technical groups, and others in relation to climate change and sustainability strategies. Whether be it local, regional, provincial, all the way up to federal governments, standards development organizations like the CSA, BC's indigenous communities, we understand that meaningful climate action is only possible through partnerships and collaboration. As an example, I'd like to highlight that we have an MOU with the Climate Risk Institute that will enable us to contribute our efforts to make available training on climate adaptation and resilience. And you will note that all of these webinars, as well as the courses that the Climate Risk Institute have provided, have been posted on our external events page. This other item is about the areas of practice. We already have numerous areas of practice, and those practice areas have a large cross-section in relation to sustainability writ large, with practice areas like energy use assessments, GHG calculation, and sustainability. When we were carrying out the engagement to develop our climate action plan, there were requests from our registrants for increased recognition for the work that they were already doing in consulting, in industry, and in governments in relation to climate risk management and climate science. So in response to that, and in recognition of the professional practice guidelines and continuing education events that we were already offering, we were able to declare new areas of practice on climate risk management and climate science that's available for engineers as well as geoscientists. You can see that we added these new practice areas about a year ago now, and you can see that we've already had quite a bit of update in the recent past. And I do believe that as these challenges and opportunities continue to evolve, that we can see a robust growth in these practice areas. And in relation to education and knowledge sharing, we used to take the work upon ourselves in terms of bringing subject matter experts to provide training for our registrants. We continue to do so, but we've become focused on delivering training as it relates to our professional practice resources. We've started to become more dynamic and flexible by leveraging training opportunities that are made available through our partner networks and through the way we sponsor conferences. And we've looked at enabling pathways for gaining continuing education events through support for consultation efforts, and really leveraging the role that we can play to mainstream the adoption of climate resiliency services. And I'd like to note that our Knowledge Center has more than 100 recorded continuing education events on numerous topics relating to adapting to climate change and reducing emissions. One of the ways that Engineers and Geoscientists BC delivers on its plan and its mandate is through the development of professional practice resources. We have a substantive portfolio of professional practice guidelines and advisories that address climate change, and we have an ongoing commitment to apply a climate lens when developing new practice resources or when revising existing ones. And not only that, we actively contribute to developing external resources, some of which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, to make sure that our work helps supports the capacity building efforts of the wider actors that work in the best interests of the society writ large. And we continue to take this role seriously as it relates to our mandate to establish, monitor, and enforce standards for professional practice. As a matter of fact, if you go to our website, you can see our latest release of our professional practice guidelines on landslide assessments. And there's been quite a bit of work put in to make sure that the standard of professional practice that has been established there reflects the challenges and opportunities that come with adapting to the changing climate. Now, as I already explained, we have the mandate to protect the public interest, but we also have the responsibility to respond to demand-side legislation. those pieces of legislation that call on registered professionals to provide professional assurances in the services that they offer. And they're increasingly requiring to factor in the impacts of climate change. The one that you may be most familiar with is the technical circular on BC that BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure has published. I'll get to that in a minute, but essentially we have started to integrate climate change considerations into our practice resources, not just because it's becoming part of the required approaches, but because we want to get to the outcomes in our own climate change action plan, which means we want our registrants to have a functional understanding of, the changing climate, the risk assessments, the risk management principles, and be able to incorporate these principles into their roles and areas of practice. We want our registrants to have access to high quality future climate data and tools for assessing and responding to climate risk in their practice. Of course, we want access to the regulations, codes, and standards that account for changing climate, as well as we contribute significantly to making sure that we put the time and effort to make sure that these products are as progressive and as reflective of the demands of the day as possible. And we certainly want the services requiring professional engineering and geoscience to be appropriately scoped to be able to assess and manage climate risk. So the way we are working is to make sure that we are delivering on those outcomes. And Engineers and Geoscience BC isn't alone in having these expectations on climate risk management. In fact, it was BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure that came up with their technical circular in 2015 that really spurred adaptation work in BC. Seen on the screen here is the technical circular, which was recently updated in 2019. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, requires engineers to A, use risk assessment methods, B, use future projected climate information, and C, include adaptation measures that not only respond to the changes in average future climate conditions, but also to the extreme weather events we are starting to see play out. And 4, it requires you to show your work to actually include what has really changed in terms of the design criteria when you fill out their technical circulars design criteria sheet for climate resilience. To meet this expectation, we developed a set of practice guidelines that provided guidance on how registrants can have a detailed step-by-step instructions on what to do when engaged to provide work on MOTI projects, and how to tailor the scope based on a screening level assessment, how to work in a transdisciplinary manner to seek diverse sources of input, and really consider what are the adaptation pathways that might be relevant, starting from low or no regret type adaptation measures, all the way to resilient design, and even looking at flexible design approaches. And because integrating future projected climate data into decision-making was new for engineers and geoscientists, we partnered up with the Pacific Climate Impacts Consortium to develop a detailed appendix on climate science as it relates to professional engineering. And we have included it in our climate change information portal, which we take it upon ourselves to frequently update. Now, I'd like to switch gears and talk about what's happening in BC. BC carried out and published the results of its preliminary strategic assessment of climate change that helped kickstart the wider engagement in terms of developing its climate preparedness and adaptation strategy. And some of you may be familiar with efforts underway to develop Canada's national climate adaptation strategy. But in BC, we are a little bit farther ahead in terms of the fact that there is now a strategy to be implemented between 2022 and 25 that's part of broader investments by the provincial government to help people and communities recover from recent disasters and to be able to prepare for the climate impacts of the future. And I'd like to quickly touch on the progress being made with respect to one of the priority initiatives on climate-ready infrastructure and buildings, focusing particularly on their highway program and the buildings program, which you can see highlighted on the screen here. So the Provincial Highway Infrastructure Climate Adaptation Program is a 9-year, $295 million climate adaptation program that includes everything from replacement and rehabilitation work to work that serves to increase the reliability and resilience of the extensive provincial highway network to new climate conditions. And I think it's one of the true adaptation success stories, because this is not just responding to the extreme weather events of the past, but it's actually requiring the identification of adaptation pinch points to really proactively start to upgrade existing highway infrastructure, including culverts, to make sure that the infrastructure can be as resilient as can be to future climate impacts. And I'll provide a little bit of a case study from the Highway Flood Recovery Project. One of the projects shown here is the Tank Hill Crossing section of Highway 1, which was damaged by last year's atmospheric river events. Permanent repairs to flood damaged sections of Highway 1 are starting to get underway, and it's great to see the coming together of engineering firms, the construction sector, working lockstep with the ministry to address public safety and climate resilience. And I do believe that this is a great learning opportunity. And if you want to follow the flood recovery work that's happening in the province, I've provided the link here, so you can go and learn and contribute to these efforts. There was one slide that talked to the work in relation to the low carbon resilient public sector buildings. Essentially what's happening there is academia, social housing sector, health facilities, they've all done work in terms of identifying how we can have a risk-based approach in terms of building climate resilient and low carbon public sector buildings. And essentially what the province has done is they have developed a framework and a set of draft standards for climate resilient public sector buildings. They're consulting on this, but essentially what they have done is required a detailed climate risk assessment to be done to be able to identify what are all the climate resilience standards, codes, and references that design teams must be able to utilize in terms of addressing the needs of the day, whether it's a new construction project or a retrofit project, and based on the criticality of the project. And this is, again, another adaptation success story that is rapidly unfolding in the province of BC. So hopefully what I wanted to communicate is that, the regulatory, market, and financial drivers to consider climate risk are rapidly growing. And hopefully I've made the point that risk-based approaches can really help to translate climate change into engineering decisions. But for us to be able to do that, we need to be able to upskill ourselves and get specific training on the use of future climate, on the use of future projected climate information, and to be able to access training so that we can have a better understanding on how to integrate climate risk management within the portfolio of services that we offer. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'll maybe pause here for a quick question or two here, but happy to take questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harshan, for this very interesting presentation and all these insights from the provincial government level in British Columbia in Western Canada. A very interesting presentation, also because it gave us insights on some political situation, how to bridge the gap between legislation and, of course, the application of PIEVCs through practical guidelines, but also the holistic approach in terms of capacity development and building that was stressed is absolutely important and very necessary. So thank you very much. And I guess there are already a number of questions I can see from the Q&A, but we will save these questions for after the next presentation. And now I would like to hand over, and it's a pleasure to hand over to Ivan Delgado and Nazaret Rojas. Again, one more comment. Katarina mentioned that already in the chat again. If you have joined us a little later, on the menu bar down below, you can either switch on English or Spanish or the original. So if you would like to hear the English interpretation, please switch on the English channel only. So having that said, I would like to hand over to Ivan from the Ministry for the Environment and Energy in Costa Rica.
Thank you very much, Benjamin, my friend. Thank you all very much. I hope you can hear me.
Very good.
Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation. Thank you very much for letting us be here, the Ministry of Environment, the Climate Change Direction, as well as the Meteorological Institute, through my friend and colleague, Nazaret Rojas. My name is Ivana Alonso Delgado. I am the Climate Change Director from the Ministry of Environment. And before starting, I would like to give the floor to Nazaret for her to go through some slides that we have prepared for you to tell you a little bit about our story. This is a story that started many years ago, where in the 60s, we started with hydropower plants. We have a lot of water in Costa Rica. It is a small country in the center of the Americas. We started in the 70s with adaptation measures, although we didn't call them that way at that moment, and it was at our national parks. Those were the first green infrastructures that we were developing. But later on, we had the great luck and the confidence of the international community through the German cooperation. And in this, Benjamin, Katarina, and other colleagues have been leaders in creating a platform that brings many countries together for us to start discussing about climate services. And I'll tell you something. One of the wonderful things that we are very grateful about is with the project of climate services for infrastructures, the famous CSI. This is a project, a global program that has 4 working packages. And in the first working package, we started to have a national discussion about the quality of the climate information that we have in Costa Rica. But secondly, we started to talk about the access to climate information in the country. And for this, we need a clear, transparent offer or supply that allows the demand to have access to this information and the capacity of using it to make decisions, to create designs for constructions, and especially for maintenance and operation. One of the wonderful things that we're very proud of in this project, the CSI project, is that we not only accomplished this understanding of the climate services and the importance of the climate services for decision making in our countries, but it was also very important for us because we went through the second package, the second work package, which had to do with the creation of enable conditions, how to create the conditions that would allow for the country to plan the adaptation. So what happened? What happened is that the CSI project inspired us so much that we were able to develop in our political planning, in our national policies, this topic of climate services, but also the topic that the previous speaker mentioned, which is the resilience of the infrastructure. But we took a step forward. We took a step beyond this. We not only incorporated the climate services and the risk assessment, the infrastructure risk assessment into our adaptation policy, into our adaptation plan and the national determined contributions, but we also developed a decree. A decree which purpose is the continuity of the infrastructure services. It could be a hospital, could be a bridge, a road. It could even be a coral reef. It could be mangroves or wetlands. In this resilience decree, which is how we call it, we determined, obviously, first of all, the access and use of climate information, but also we tried to avoid saying resilience of the infrastructure, to use another concept, which is the continuity of the service, because this is what is going to allow us to be strengthened in case of an adversity in the communities. In other words, being resilient. So we went from understanding just the resilience of the infrastructure, because we could have some infrastructure that could endure a climate event, but the communities would get flooded. Or perhaps we had an excellent bridge, but then there was no water. So for us, it was very important to understand that really resilience is not for the infrastructure. Resilience is for living beings, for human beings. So if the point of contact is human beings as the face of climate change, so this is what allows us to get to adapt. That is what allows us to adapt, to see that human face into all this. And how we see it, we see this through the losses and through the damage. And this is what we want to communicate to you today with the presentation that our colleague Nazaret is going to present in a second. And finally, I would like to tell you that in addition to planning, we have a third package of the CSI project, which is to develop the Costa Rican methodology to assess climate risks in infrastructure. And you know what? Canada was a great inspiration for us. Engineers Canada has been an extraordinary support for us to get inspired to create a customized methodology according to the needs of our country. And that has allowed us to develop several applications of this methodology that will practically be available starting next year for the international community. This is an offer we make to the world, because in addition to being countries that are exposed, vulnerable, fragile, with losses and damages, we also want to be recognized as a country of solutions, as a country of response. We are going from the climate crisis to the climate emergency. And we are going from this emergency in a few years to a global collapse. So we cannot just allow for this to happen. If there is some hope in the world, dear colleagues, if there is still some hope in this world, it's because the world is turning their eyes to us, and that is why we're here together. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I'll give the floor to my colleague Nazaret for her to go deeper into the topic of mercy and to be able to go deeper into the spaces, which is the fourth package we have, which is to communicate and tell the world what we have done. Thank you. Thank you, Ivan. for these very important and interesting words that have opened a setting for me to present the technical part. I would like to begin by telling you a little bit about the images that you can see in this cover page of my presentation, that we have been looking at this for a long time. We were listening to Ivan's speech. For those of you that did not pay a lot of attention, 3 seconds, please. Let's move to the next one. Jasmine, can you move to the next slide, please? Hello, do you hear me?
Hang on. Jasmine, can you hear us? Hang on. Sorry, just a second. Jasmine, actually, can you speak through the Spanish channel? Or maybe you are. Let me see if I can advance it.
I'm in the Spanish channel, but I cannot hear Nazareth. Jasmine, do you hear me? Jasmine?
Sorry, I can just pull up the presentation. I've got it here. Sorry, 2 seconds.
Okay, not to waste time.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I've got it. Just give me. Okay, I'm sharing my screen right now.
Perfect. Okay, to introduce what the climate context of the country is, historically, Costa Rica, because of its location in the Central American Isthmus, in a very thin part between the two continents, and surrounded by two oceanic systems, the Pacific and the Atlantic, it has allowed, also because of the socioeconomic conditions, there has been a series of vulnerabilities in such a way that the country has been seriously affected by different events such as droughts, cyclones, and of course by the El Niño phenomenon, the Southern Oscillation phenomenon called El Niño. Next slide. These are just for you to have an idea. These are the extreme event statistics that have generated some impact in the country since 1988 to 2010. And as we can see, one of the main events that have caused these disasters has been heavy rains or accumulated rain for several days, which is called here in Costa Rica like temporary heavy rains. We are not far from being affected by strong winds or gusts that are usually related to cold fronts or different indirect effects of tropical cyclones. Then we also have the extreme rainstorms, which are short in terms of the timing, but very intense. And also we have rain deficit, more than droughts, I would say rain deficits, because we have not had so much droughts as such, but we have had some water deficit. And of course, we also are affected by extreme temperatures. Next slide. Very well. This is an analysis that was generated by the General Comptroller's Office in Costa Rica based on the statistics that I presented on the slide, to see how the period 1988-2010 was for the repair or reconstruction of public infrastructure and assistance for those that are really affected. In this case, we're talking about the civil society and the producers, went between 0.3% and 1.7% of the GDP in the country. In this case, obviously, we work with a threshold in percentages because the events don't have like a specific pattern. Therefore, we work with these thresholds. So the Comptroller's Office, the General Comptroller's Office, makes a projection with two scenarios. One conservative scenario, where for the period 2011-2025, it is estimated that the trend for the maximum increase in the GDP can reach 1.05%. While in the alternative scenario or most pessimistic scenario, we can get to 2.5%. So as I said, this also depends on which the effect would be for the country in the future and the different socioeconomic conditions that may be affecting the country. So by making these analyses, it is concerning to see how the situation that we're experiencing nowadays, in which a great part of our public finance is devoted to construction or repair of infrastructure, that is still vulnerable because it is not managed with other lines of analysis to improve their resilience, to improve the capacity of providing the service in case of extreme events. And if you analyze all those statistics for losses and damages for the whole country, for the different sectors, socioeconomic sectors, a big chunk of the funds, emergency funds to cover disasters are invested in the reconstruction of public works and mainly hydraulic works. Next slide. Okay. From this perspective, the General Comptroller's Office, by looking at the concern and also with the statistical data, big data on how the situation of the country was with regards to infrastructure or vulnerability of the infrastructure, it was decided in the year 2000. I'm sorry, I think it was 2018, 2019, but they decided to request the different entities of the government that are related to the construction of public works, both road infrastructure as well as home or housing infrastructure, of course, with the support of the Climate Change Direction and the Ministry of Environment and Energy. So they requested through the executive decree to develop guidelines to analyze the resilience and to incorporate the results in the designs of different stages, pre-feasibility or feasibility, depending on the cycle the project is, and see how to incorporate this type of analysis through these guidelines in order not to just like, you know, build and rebuild, build and rebuild. Some other areas was to use the nationally determined contributions to reinforce the country's commitment to strengthening the climate resilience, which supports the National Adaptation Plan that was published this year. This adaptation plan was designed based on 6 areas, 6 axes, where axes 1 and 4 are directly related to climate resilience and the strengthening of climate services, capacity building, and of course, the improvement of resilience in the infrastructures. This national adaptation plan was worked on with a group of consultation tables with different experts from different institutions in order to generate different indicators or different adaptation measures that were planned according to the needs and according to the capacity too. So from this point of view, we see that we do have a political framework to act in terms of resilience for infrastructure. Next slide, please. Okay, in this sense, and even prior to this political framework for resilience, the country had been already applying this type of analysis. So in the year 2008, we started with the Association of Engineers in Canada, and we're the first country outside Canada where we applied the PIEVC. The first experience was in the submarine sewage outfall in Limon. We took even more than 2 years. The official information here was 2010, 2012, but really we were for about 2 years in the training about the PIEVC. So the second application that was made in the aquifer of Nemajotas in Guanacaste, where there is a series of rural aqueducts, potable aqueducts, rural potable aqueducts that have a lot of vulnerabilities, because Guanacaste is one of the driest areas in the country. And within the framework of the CSI project, we developed an application of the PIEVC in the bridge on the Tempisque River in La Guardia in Liberia, Guanacaste. Next slide. Okay. It was not until this last application in La Guardia, Liberia, where we have had like enough lessons learned regarding the process and the methodology of the PIEVC, the pros and cons of taking a foreign methodology with different realities. And when I say realities, I'm talking about climate data as well as infrastructure, for example, and other climatic realities and other realities with regards to the environment. And of course, everything related to the regulatory framework. So taking this policy or this political support as the basis, and of course, the funding by CSI to be able to support us in generating our own methodology that was called MERCI-CR, which corresponds to methodology and evaluation of risk for climate and infrastructure. This is what the acronym means. So, as I said, based on this adaptation, the process, what it mainly did was to help us focus on the capacities on the national context and even the regional context, because it could apply to any Central American country. The modification of the methodology was focused on the needs of the potential users, because the idea is to try to use this methodology and bring it to the market, bring it to the institutions, and continue using it. This is our plan and our desire at this moment. One of the incorporations made in the methodology or to the methodology was an analysis of data quality and assessment of data quality, because we have that condition that if we enter bad information into a process, into an analysis, then we're going to have bad results. So in the case of Costa Rica, and because of our experience in the application of the PIEVC, we determined that a lot of the data has to be based on expert criteria, which generates an increase in the uncertainty of the results. So there's a whole process for this analysis, this robustness analysis, which is the way we call it. The idea with MERS is to generate, based on the examples, guidelines for the generation of adaptation measures, and see how these could focus from a general point of view, from a general perspective, and obviously to see how we can work together with the owner of the infrastructure and the team to get to some more specific measures, and also to see which are more necessary based on a threshold that we could define, a risk threshold that could be defined from that interaction between the owner of the infrastructure and the team, the working team. So the owner of the infrastructure has to define how much they can invest and where to invest what they have to make more resilient infrastructure or to apply the different adaptation measurements. Next slide. How is it that MERSI works? It is very similar to the PIEVC. It is like a mini-me of the PIEVC. And it works the same way with the interaction between the different climate events that are characterized as a threat and the different components of the infrastructure. So we define the interaction. If there is an effect of the infrastructure due to each of these events. So the particularity is that the vulnerability criteria would be defined by the working team, and they are structured from the physical or structural perspective, something functional, operational. And there is even an option to have other criteria established by the work team, considering, for example, the environmental topic that is very important for the country, or health, which is also very important for the country. So we also use a risk matrix, and we work with a heat matrix where risk is equal to the application of threat plus vulnerability, being this interaction factor is yes or no. So in the results, and I had advanced a little bit about this first, part of this methodology defines a little bit what is risk threshold that we're going to take into account. When is it that we're going to be working on the higher risks or the risks that require like more immediate intervention? So as I was telling you, we focused a lot on the fact of making this a participatory methodology, but especially including the local knowledge, because that was one of the big experiences. This was one of the big lessons learned we have with the 3 applications of the PIEVC before. The knowledge of people, the people that live there, the people that live in the basins, the people that live in the city, the people that use the bridge. Those are the people that really have a historical memory that is just incredible. And then also one of the partners we had with social media. Everybody wants a minute of fame, and there is a lot of information that can be found in those digital media, but will require a lot of time to be able to make all this research. So moving on with the adaptation profiles, the idea with Mercy is that these measurements go from the economic and social political point of view. It is very important for the country, and also from the legal perspective, because there are lots of regulatory conditions in the country that do not allow us to make some modifications. For example, the protection areas for a river basin, because the protection zone goes from the river flow 15 meters on the sites where you cannot cut a tree, where you cannot build absolutely anything, unless, for example, you have a permit from the state to be able to do some work, or if the work is an international one. So, considering all these conditions, we had to establish which are the measurements that are required in an immediate way, either at the midterm or at a long term. Obviously, considering the cost that these different interventions would have. Next slide. And in general terms, the methodology is divided into 4 chapters. The first one analyzes the context where the infrastructure is, what's the climate, where it's located, what are the different elements of the infrastructure, some very general things. The next chapter, or number 2, is specifically on the risk assessment with the different matrices, even segregated matrices by type of threat, so that it is a little bit easier to see the information. So the idea with Mercy and the different templates is that from a very first site, a very first perspective, it would be easier to interpret the data and present them also to the different decision makers or to the owner of the infrastructure. Chapter 3 has to do with the evaluation of the risk, the assessment of such of the risk. And as I was telling you before, the idea with all this is to define how to implement and how to develop these different adaptation measures based on the risk that can be undertaken by the owner of the infrastructure. This is something that I have been highlighting quite a lot. And chapter 4, of course, is conclusions and recommendations. Next slide. The next steps. Okay, from this experience developing Mercy and all the process that the Association of Engineers and Architects has gone through in Costa Rica, they also saw the need of creating a risk and management office for climate change in the infrastructure sector. With regards to Mercy, we plan to make an official presentation in December 2022, which was planned to be done in November this year. But due to the fact that the minister as well as Ivan have to go to the COP, we had to move it to December this year. But of course, we're a little bit ambitious and we want to have in the future versions of Mercy ways of incorporating a cost-benefit analysis in social topics and environmental topics, for example. And of course, we want to move forward in a Mercy Green module. We have not yet decided on the name, but it is like trying to incorporate some adaptation, nature-based adaptation actions. And of course, before the CSI is over, the idea is to have a digital Mercy with an open platform such as Excel, using macros in such a way that any person could use it, and eventually any person could give maintenance to it. Next one, and I think it's the last one. I don't know if there is any question. If not, well, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nazaret. Thank you so much also, Ivan, for this very rich presentation on the case of Costa Rica. And I guess one of my takeaways is, again, that despite the fact that Canada and Costa Rica is quite far away from each other, there are many, many similarities, not only in terms of exposure, vulnerabilities, and all the risks that were mentioned, but certainly also in terms of legislature, and governance aspects that are taken into account. So thanks a lot for these presentations. And considering the time, I would very much like to quickly go over and ask some questions from the audience. So far, I see basically 3 or 4 questions. First question, 2 questions actually come from Joel Nodelman. And with your permission, Joel, I would like to ask these 2 questions not only to Harshan, but also to Ivan and Nazaret. And the question is, are you seeing much uptake of your initiatives in other engineering associations in Canada? And if we translate that question to the context of Costa Rica, what about other sectors that might get involved in Costa Rica? And what about the higher political level? Is the higher political level also endorsing the process? But first of all, I would like to hand over to Harshan. What about lessons learned taken up from BC to other provinces?
Yeah, I would say that BC is not alone in terms of leading and supporting these initiatives. As a matter of fact, I am aware that many other professional associations, I'd like to say Professional Engineers Ontario, they have an ongoing ad hoc climate change group. The New Brunswick Association, they have a federal funded initiative to develop training resources. The Professional Geoscientists Ontario, they have a dedicated climate space that they use to support their members. Manitoba, they have the Manitoba Climate Resilience Training that they make available to all the prairie provinces. So I would say that the strengths are there. It's just a matter of connecting the dots and working together collaboratively in terms of maximizing the impact. There are always going to be some challenges, but the way I see it is we have to be able to celebrate the successes, learn from the projects that have been funded, and try to mainstream the provision of these services through all available means. But I'm certainly interested to hear from other panelists on this topic.
Thank you so much, Harshan. I would like to hand over also regarding this question to Nazaret or Ivan. More questions are now coming in. So as far as I see, we are running out of time, but you remember Claire's presentation on our new possibilities to do networking online. So please also feel free to save all your questions and also put them online into our on our webpage that was mentioned before. And I guess Katerina is also showing again the link. I hand over to Ivan. How is this taken up by other government agencies?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nazaret may add to this, but very quickly, I would like to say that part of what we have done with the Mercy instrument has helped us a lot with the recent negotiation we did with the Monetary Fund, the International Monetary Fund, thanks to Mercy, thanks to this methodology, we were able to put within the framework of the discussion with the International Monetary Fund a tool to construct, to create resiliency in the communities through the continuity of the services of infrastructure. It is the operational arm of the Resilience Decree, and that allowed us to integrate the Ministry of Public Works and Transportation, the Ministry of Planning, the Ministry of Human Settlements, obviously the Ministry of the Environment. We were able to talk to the Public Investment Direction. We were able to talk to the Emergency Commission, and we were able to put into the single discussion table all these stakeholders. And thanks to Mercy, we were able to put the tool in the center of the discussion. And the Monetary Fund, they were very happy because they had never seen, at least in this case, for the developing countries, they had never seen an offer of methodologies for the resilience of the infrastructures, for the continuity of the infrastructure. So this was a great opportunity for us to have this tool, to have it available and to put it in the discussion table, and to put all the institutions that were interested in resilience and the continuity of the public services, with them all to discuss and to talk, to get connected. So this is what was allowed for this tool. Yes, also, one of the lessons that we learned with the application of the PIEVC was to incorporate different institutions in such a way that they could be with us in an expanded group, the working group of Mercy. And there were different institutions that got involved, going from the infrastructure service, the electricity sector, potable water, academic sector, the National Commission for Emergencies, the Ministry of Housing and Urbanization, and of course the Ministry of Planning. Another aspect that we have to highlight here is that at the country level, the plan, which is the Ministry for Planning, they have their own guides. They have specific guides or guidelines for public infrastructure that may require some external credit. Those are very robust methodologies that require a lot of information. They require a lot of analysis. And therefore, a whole consultancy work is required to be able to include this within the pre-feasibility study to do this analysis, not only of climate risk, but also multi-threat, because we are an exotic country that has multiple threats. So in that sense, we were kind of covered in terms of having a methodology that could be applicable, that could be manageable, that could quickly and without many resources be generating very good results. So this is where Mercy came out, and this is where we got this idea of putting these lenses or these perspectives for the different institutions to learn about the genesis of Mercy. And in that process, they could provide ideas, they could provide comments, and they could make or give us all this feedback with constructive criticism and non-constructive criticism in such a way that when we came to them to present a tool, we could say to them, okay, this is something that was done in consensus. This is by and for you. That would be what I would add.
Thank you so much for these answers, Nazaret and Ivan. We're running out of time. 1 minute left. I would just like to have one last question that comes from Stacey O'Sullivan for Harshan. And maybe Harshan, you are able to quickly answer that. What types of adaptation measures were undertaken at Tank Hill? And what types of climate data were considered when rebuilding?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think adaptation efforts are actively underway. I'm not able to comment on what type of measures have been considered there, but I'll tell you this much. It really goes back to having risk-based approaches, which means that you need to be identifying what are the climate variables that you need to be looking at, right? From, storm-driven peak flows, the maximum 5-day precipitation events, what are the climate scenarios that you're considering? And what are the elements at risk? Are there hillsides here, embankments? Are there third-party utilities? Are there productive works that you need to be concerned about? So it's really about looking at the climate projections, climate variables that you need to be considering, and the elements at risk to carry out a risk assessment to be able to drive decision making. And I would say it's ultimately up to expert judgment making on the part of infrastructure professionals. And I would say, that leads me to connect this aspect that training is key to be able to do this in a consistent manner. And so it's something that we can continue to monitor and all learn from, but that's essentially the approach.
Thank you very much, Harshan. So I see there's a number of more questions now coming in from Ernesto, from Jim, and from Zane. As Katerina has mentioned in the chat, we are all going to save these questions and put them on the web. And all our participants on the panel, Harshan, Ivan, and also Nazaret, will answer those questions. And I see also a number of questions going into the direction of the climate services, which RCPs were taken. And I think that's also a beautiful transition, a bridge over to our next session that will come in 1 month, where we focus a lot more on the question of climate services. So for the rest, let me say thank you very much, Nazaret, Ivan, Harshan, big virtual hand for you for these very rich presentations showing all the similarities between very different countries and regions in the world. And we'd like to, as I pointed out, we'd like to invite you for our next month's session, another webinar. And this time, as I mentioned, we will focus on the role of climate services in climate risk and vulnerability assessments, and also, of course, on the challenges and best practices of making climate services or climate information services available and usable in PIEVC applications. The session again will begin at noon Eastern Standard Time, to accommodate our presenters from British Columbia as well, and of course Peru and Costa Rica, and of course joining us from other parts of the world. And let me also say, lately also during this session, our colleagues, at least 2 colleagues, I guess, from Vietnam also joined. So great, thanks a lot. That shows a lot of commitment. It's after midnight already in Vietnam. So big hand also for you joining us here today. In the meantime, we welcome you also, of course, to join our new networking space that we introduced earlier. And yeah, let me say thank you again to all participants, and of course also a big hand for Rosa for the great interpretation, as always, perfect. I think no technical hiccups, and yeah, great, thank you for that. And also thanks, of course, for Claire and Katerina supporting us here technically with the chat and all the functions. And yeah, I hope to see you next time. And also in the chat function, we could see there was another link for SurveyMonkey. So it would be great if you can spare a number of minutes and also give us some feedback on this session today. And I guess time-wise, next time we will use, again, we try at least to use more time for Q&As, and yeah, and also to come back to some of the questions which were not answered in today's session. So thank you very much again. It was a pleasure, and hope to see you next time for our next webinar session. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.